Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they are not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Michelle Barnes. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It's great to be able to talk to you, Kathy.
Michelle and I have been talking about doing this interview for quite a few months now, so I'm glad we finally got it on the calendar. And listeners, this is going to be a very exciting interview today because Michelle has got a very important role in the state government. Michelle is the executive director of the Colorado Department of Human Services and a member of Governor Polis's cabinet. So I can't wait to hear about what it means to be in those two roles. But before we get into that, I always like to start with icebreaker questions so that our listeners get a chance to know you as a person before we know you as the executive director in the cabinet. Michelle, if you would tell us where you grew up, how many kids in your family, where you were in the birth order, and how do you think that affected you as a young adult?
That's a great first question, Kathy. So I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa, which is a smallish town right on the Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska border. And I'm one of 7 kids, and I'm smack in the middle.
And
a
middle child with 7.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. And it's interesting growing up with that many siblings, and most of us are about a year and a half apart. Some a little more, some a little less, but about a year and a half apart. So one of the things you learn when you grow up in a big family is that you lose all protocol on talking over people and grabbing things off people's plates and fighting and competing, and this whole mentality of it's like a bushel of kids. And so I think one of the things that really is interesting when I look back at my family is how we all kind of specialized. I had a brother who was super smart, so he kind of took the moniker of being the smart kid. And then another sister, I wanted to be a gymnast. I love gymnastics, but I was horrible at it. And then I had a sister who was a natural, so you kind of give that up to her. Okay, you're the gymnast in the family, and you're the one that's really fun and the life of the party, so you get that. And you kind of, everyone finds their lane in a good way, not in a bad way. You all just kind of find what your niche is, and
and then you're not competing with each other for that particular title. You kind of already accepted that. So what was your niche?
At the time, I think I was the one that was the easiest to tease and make fun of. But I also think I just had this, like fire on whether it's social justice or doing the right thing or equity or fairness. And I just didn't know how to hold back my passions around it. And so I was the one that was always sticking up for the underdog and always, seeing things in a little bit different way than maybe the majority.
Interesting. Do you think part of that is that because you had so many siblings, you could see all their points of view, so then you could see then your point of view? I don't know. It's interesting.
I don't know. They were all super smart and talented in their own way, and I just felt a little bit like my talents were elsewhere. I was never the sports star or the funnest person. I was more the just kind of steady Eddie.
Steady Eddie. Reliable.
I did my homework. I studied. I tried to be home on time. Be the moral compass with your friends. That was me.
The voice of reason.
The voice of reason. I was an old soul at an early age.
Well, that's funny. I'm a middle child of 3 kids. And so I have that same title. So I don't know if that's a middle child thing, but with 7 kids, you actually have 5 middle kids, right? In there.
Right.
The oldest, the youngest, and all the middles. So, well, I find this whole birth order question so fascinating. It's really been a fun thing to learn about. I think it really, then as I listen to your journey, it's interesting to see how that plays out for you. So, and along those lines, then, where do you sit on the fun meter on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being couch potato and 5 being life of the party.
I will say I'm going to put myself at a 5. I
Oh,
am
life of the party.
I have so much energy to do so many different things. And I wake up in the morning, I set my alarm earlier every day because there's just more things I want to do and think about and explore. And it's really hard for me to say no to something because everything sounds interesting. Like, do you want to
Mm.
have coffee and talk? Yes, I do. Do you want to read this book and then talk about? Absolutely. Do you want to go away for the weekend and we're going to get a bunch of people and ski? I'm in.
You're,
So
you want to be interviewed for a podcast? Yes.
of course I do.
Okay, so introvert or extrovert?
So, it's interesting. I always thought myself as an extrovert, and then I took a Myers-Briggs test and found I'm right on the border, and that seems about right. While I love to be with other people and engage, I don't want to do it half-heartedly, and I really need that time alone to reflect and process and get energy together so I can be all in when I'm with people. So
Mm,
I'm right on the border of it.
yeah,
Comfortable being alone and super comfortable being with other people.
very cool. Yeah, and then when you want to be the life of the party, totally can, and that gives you energy. But when you want to read a book, you totally can, and
And that gives me energy.
do. Okay, cool. Okay, so on the risk meter scale of 1 to 5, where do you stand?
You know, I would say if, I was saying for myself, I'd say a 4 or 5. But if I look back over my journey, I've taken a lot of steps that kind of minimized risk. And so, I think earlier in my life, I was very risk averse. And then as I've gotten older and more confident and, the bar by which you could fall below gets higher, then my risk tolerance has definitely gone up. So right now, I'd say I'm a 5.
Yeah, I would put you at a 5, especially when I consider what role you just took.
That was a good 5 move.
Yeah, a good 5 move. And then the other roles that you continue to take that I know about you and your, the other leadership roles. Yeah, definitely a 5 there. So very cool. Well, Michelle, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be the executive director for the Colorado Department of Human Services and member of Governor Polis's cabinet. We'll talk about, just a little bit about what that's like, and then we'll get into how did I get here? So
Yeah.
give us a rundown of what your role is.
So, well, this is my first job in public service, and I started about a year and a half ago. And so I run the department at the state that runs all the programs for more vulnerable populations or people in need and trying to help lift them up so they can do more with their life. So I run youth corrections, I run child welfare, food assistance, crisis mental health system for the state, including state mental hospitals. It's a pretty broad and more. And a lot of services for seniors and people with disabilities. So it's a really broad portfolio. So I kind of characterize my job as I'm a leader of leaders. I have lots of
Mm.
very talented, amazing people under me, and they know all the details. And my job is to connect the dots between everything they're doing and pull it together and make priority and trade-off decisions between this and that and this and that. So it's the first time I've really had a role where my job's not to be the subject matter expert or do everything or review everything or read everything. My job's to empower really terrific people to do what they do best.
I love that, leader of leaders. And also, I want to thank you for your public service. This is a big job. I mean, when you list all those agencies and all the people that you're touching, it's so. Thank you, for stepping in and taking on this big job. And then, of course, you probably took it on before the pandemic, which added another level of complexity to your world.
Think it has. And the other part of it is I also serve on Governor Polis's cabinet, and that's a small group of people that run his agencies who meet with them at least weekly, but often more regularly to talk about policies for the state and then make trade-offs between the different departments. So an example would be right now, our economy is suffering. So do we invest that in highway projects or do we invest it in affordable housing? Or do we invest it in making sure there's enough food for hungry people? Given so many people are losing their job, and so it's really fun to be on his cabinet and see how that discussion happens, and be able to see the insights into the political side, even though I'm not a political, I'm not a politician. I'm definitely a executive branch. Um, yeah, it turned out a little different than I expected. I was overwhelmed from the first day, and um, it never really caught up. You go, oh, I'll get my feet under my ground. Oh, next month will be better. And oh, next session, next time the legislature comes back, I'll know what to do. But the world just keeps changing, not just for me and the people I work with, but also for the people we're serving. The average Coloradan right now is in a very different situation than they were a year ago. And so being able, governments move slowly, but to be able to pivot fast enough to respond to the needs of just normal people in Colorado is a real challenge. So things move fast, and I'm glad I'm very comfortable with change because every day is a change.
Wow, you mentioned so many interesting points there. What a challenge it is to make a trade-off decision like that. Is it about homeless or affordable housing? It is about food. Is it about transportation? I mean, all of those things. You starts to come down to what's probably the most urgent, and how do you make those decisions? So very, very tough decisions.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not governor, and he has to make those decisions. But we could get to weigh in on what the trade-offs might be, and
Yeah.
it's hard because you know we have a lot of people in Colorado, and we all have different opinions and different perspectives. And there's rural and urban and marginalized communities, and there's a lot of considerations to take into account.
Yeah. Well, I feel better knowing that you're in the cabinet and
Thank
that
you, Kathy.
and that you're out there serving our state of Colorado. And my sister works for the state of Colorado as well. I think I mentioned you
Yeah,
to
yeah,
her, or her to you both. And so, yeah, having some insiders in there is really, I feel like I'm more educated. I have a greater appreciation for government, regardless of what people think about government and how big it should be. You really need to know the inside workings of it because it is far more complicated, I think, than anyone can imagine, and the size and scope of it. So, again,
absolutely.
thank you for your public
My
service.
joy to be able to be here and do this. Sometimes things just work out where you're in the right place at the right time. And I'm in my 50s, so I feel like I've spent my whole life preparing me to do this job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. Well, we're going to get more into this in the as we go through this. So, tell us a little bit about when you were a young person, though, junior high, high school, what you wanted to be when you grew up. I mean, you already said, well, I wasn't really looking to be in public service. So, what did you want to be when you were younger?
It's funny. I've listened to your podcast, so I expected that question might come. And I don't know that I had a specific goal. I when I think back to the common theme of my thinking and my behaviors and actions, probably through my most of my 20s, I wanted to be educated. I wanted to learn.
Mm.
I wanted to know more. What that Where that ended, I wasn't as concerned about. Going back to the lanes, I had a brother that was taking the lawyer lane and a sister that was taking the doctor lane. And so, I didn't know what lane I'd be in. So I was just more interested in being educated, learning, and kind of figuring it out after I knew more. So I
Oh,
took the complete academic path of, you know, got good grades, studied hard, pushed myself in college and graduate school, and then kind of thought I'd figure it out later.
so you kept kicking the can down the road until you had to make a decision.
I just felt like I needed more life experience to make a decision on what I wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's your bachelor's and your graduate work in then?
Bachelor's is econ from William and Mary, and I didn't even know what economics was before I went to college, but it was a class that was easiest. So, and everyone's complaining about how hard econ is, and I'm like, this is my easiest class. I better major in it. And then I worked for a bit, and then I went back and got an MBA and just did it more of a generalist study. And that's when I realized what I liked was connecting the dots. So not being an expert in accounting or not being an expert in operations or HR, but the ability to kind of look at all those functional areas and bring it together to drive the whole team forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of what occurred for me when you said that was that makes me think a lot of economics. To me, economics is about how do you connect all of those things, and it's not about specializing. It's a cause and effect and the impact, and that everything's connected. It's all interconnected, which
Absolutely.
we're
Economics
learning.
allocates the resources, and um, that trade-off between A or B, C or D. You have to look at all the information to make a good decision. So business school really helped me kind of let all that sink in. And it also gave me the confidence that my biggest learning out of business school is I'm never going to ask a dumb question. Like there are no dumb questions. Even super smart people, experts are going to ask questions, and you just don't know, or you don't have the information, or your brain's not, computing that way that day. And it really gave me the courage to be more inquisitive and bring kind of that um, beginner mind to work and life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I love that perspective because I would tend to think, and again, I'm just stereotyping. Once a young person gets a master's, sometimes it's like, oh, I've got all this knowledge. I'm so smart. I should know all these things. So then to go out in the world and then ask what might be considered dumb questions may not look right. I remember when I was younger, I was in that mode of, I should have known that. I should know these things. Did I do my enough homework? So I was always kind of doubting versus I did realize once I got more into business, it was really important to make sure you clarified and understood things. And no one
Yeah.
can know everything. And so I wish I'd have got that sooner though. I wish I'd have had that aha moment sooner.
Yeah, I think it's why it's sometimes hard to bring somebody straight out of college or graduate school into your organization because they think they know everything and they've studied it and then 2 days later they realize, well, I have a foundational knowledge and I have some data points, but you know, game day is different than studying for game day or training for game day.
Yeah.
And luckily, I had a lot of good mentors and coworkers and bosses that I just kind of followed what they were doing and saw what I could learn from them. And it became like a new education. What in theory you do in terms of XYZ isn't actually how you do it in practice, but it gives you a way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And you had that kind of aha when you finished your masters, or was it kind of during your masters, or was it that first job maybe that got you
It
to
was,
oh
it was really the first job. I
ah.
thought, oh, I have an MBA, I've got a lot of debts. I mean, my salary doubled between when I started my MBA and when I got out. So, I'm feeling pretty cocky. Look at this. I must be twice as valuable. And then you get to work and you realize, you know, no, that's not actually the case. And I think one of the good humbling things I had is you do feel a little sense of false confidence. And I went into a job where a lot of my coworkers didn't have college degrees. I was working in Silicon Valley and high tech, and however you got there is how you got there. It doesn't matter if it's education or um, great ideas or just able to prove it. And all of a sudden I'm working with all these people that hadn't taken the education path, and man, they were teaching me stuff right and left, and it kind of gave me pause, like, okay, my education is not my ticket to the rest of the world, it's my launch pad to enter it, and now I need to do with it what I'm going to do with it. So I'm glad I have all the education, but I also really have an understanding that you can learn from absolutely anyone and never judge and never start feeling cocky that a degree behind your name gives you any special insight that someone else might not have.
Yeah. Well, and then it gives you that's kind of one way in, just like you described, but there are multiple ways in. So there's multiple ways to learn and grow. And yeah, very cool.
Absolutely.
Well, great lessons there, listeners. And to get that kind of aha or that humbling moment early in life, because it's going to come at some point for everybody, right?
They keep coming, Kathy. Just
Yeah.
when you think you got something down, you're like, how did I not ever put those two pieces of information together? And you have like, I feel like I have daily ahas.
Well, and isn't that this? There's some saying about that, isn't there? About the older I get, the more I learn, the less that I know, or something like that.
Exactly.
The more I know, the less that I know. I don't know. Well, I'll have to look up the quote. Obviously, I'm butchering
But
that. So
it's a good reminder that every time you add more information into your life experience, you see the world a little bit differently. And so, of course, more life experience is going to give you more perspective and more grounding and more ability to, well, like right now in the state government, we're looking at what the COVID recovery will be and with the economy. And so you go back to the lessons of 2008 when we had that big recession and what happened then and what really pulled people out and what had a long hang time, and really looking at it from the perspective of education and information, which kind of comes from having lived through the last one.
Yeah. And yeah, the historical, what worked, what didn't, right? Because a lot of times you can have what you think is a great idea, but practicality of it may or may not be
No.
uh, something that works out. So, wow. Well, very cool. So, what were some of your first jobs then? Kind of how did your career progress then after Silicon Valley, or how did you even get into Silicon Valley? Was that your first job?
It was my first job out of graduate school. I worked for a consulting firm after undergrad, more doing research and data analysis, which is a path, you know, I thought I might go and I thought I might get a PhD and, continue on the economics. And then I took a volunteer job working at a home for runaway kids. And all of a sudden I found this decision point where do I go the social worker, save the world route, or do I go more of a business route? And I picked the business one, figuring I don't have good boundaries. And I was afraid of being a directly working with foster kids or kids that needed adoption or homeless families. I would just be sucked dry. But if I took the business path, I could go in and run the businesses, and people who had better boundaries could do that direct care. So after graduate school, I got my MBA from UCLA, and I decided to join Silicon Valley because it seemed like that's where all the entrepreneurial, creative people were going, and there's just like an energy there. And I like the idea of living in San Francisco, so that really drew a lot of, those are the people I wanted to be with. I wasn't really in love with technology, and I'm still not, but I managed to work there in the tech sector for, you know, over 10 years and enjoy it, but it was never the technology. It was the entrepreneurialism and the creativity and the ability to pivot really fast. I just love the environment.
Ah,
But I
so
mostly worked in marketing in Silicon Valley.
so in a way, it could have been kind of any product. It was just the circumstances around all of that, the people, the
Yeah.
leadership, the business
Yeah.
aspect of it, connecting dots, probably all of those pieces.
If you go back to the 90s, yeah, 90s, there was a boom going on in California. And even one of the things I got to do as part of being in that sector is move to Europe for 3 years. And I was offered an opportunity to do a marketing role in at our European headquarters for a large tech company in Amsterdam. And I got the offer the week of my honeymoon, and my husband was adventurous as well, and we said, "Why not? Let's just go do this." And we got to spend 3 years in Amsterdam and just fell in love with that idea of seeing different cultures and interacting with different perspectives. And it was just a really good way to really launch your career, but also launch a partnership with your husband.
Well, yeah, because you're the only two people you know,
Yep.
probably, because you don't even know your company. I mean, you might know some of the people in your company, but I mean, when you move to a different country, wow. So back to being a five on the risk meter.
Yeah. Well, even the language stuff, I could be fine in the business meetings that were in English, but lunch was in Dutch, or maybe the French country manager was in town and that lunch was in French. And you're like, my head just spun. And I'm horrible at languages, in spite of probably 10 cumulative years of language lessons between French and Dutch and German. I still speak nothing. I have no capacity for languages. So that was really hard too. But it was fun. I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad the opportunity came up and that I jumped on it.
Yeah, because those don't come up very often, and then sometimes they come up and you're not in a position to take them. I mean, I know people who have, they have families and they choose not to
Right.
do it. Sometimes they want to take the family, but there's just different reasons why you would or wouldn't do that. So it's great that
Yeah.
you had that opportunity.
I actually laughed. It was a good thing I didn't have enough money to buy a house or have a nice car. Like everything I had could be sold at a garage sale. So it was pretty easy to move at that point in my life. And
So
then I
probably
came back.
all you had was debt, not necessarily any assets.
Exactly. Exactly.
Unfortunately, the debt goes with you. It travels, darn
Yeah,
it.
that's funny. You don't get to give that up when you take a assignment in another country. But I did that, and I came back to the tech sector in Silicon Valley, and so it's kind of what I feel like was my phase one of my career was working mostly in marketing and product marketing in the tech sector. I got to do a lot of PR and kind of basic um, communications roles, which was great. And then 9/11 happened, and everything about being in the tech sector changed. And money dried up, venture capital dried up, really good businesses were going under just because of their capitalization, not because they didn't have a great business plan. They just maybe had a longer runway they needed to make it happen. And consequently, I lost my job. Our company just shut down, and I was with a small startup.
Yeah.
And and that brings an opportunity, right? So you're in a sector, you love the sector, but the sector is now, you know, not thriving, and jobs are going to be hard to get, and funding's going to be hard to get. So I just saw it as a chance to pivot, and I had done a lot of volunteer work in the nonprofit sector, a lot, and I thought maybe it's time to, you know, go back to what I had thought about, which is you can save the world as running a business that saves the world, or you can be directly doing it. So that maybe it's time to pivot. And out of the blue, I got an opportunity to move to Colorado and join Outward Bound as their national VP of marketing. And again, it took about 10 seconds. I'm like, we're in. And a day later, I was in the car and headed to Colorado. And that was almost 20 years ago now. So my next pivot was to more of working with um, communities that I was passionate about. And Outward Bound's focused on character development and leadership in young people. And I mean, and in the outdoors, no less. Um, boy, that's an opportunity most of us can get our heads around.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And but it also is like 180 degrees from the tech world because now you're outside, you're with I mean you were working with kind of young adults, but this is actually more young people, right? Like teenagers.
Really, teenagers, yeah. It was interesting. The board hired me, and of course, they're looking at your resume and oh, tick this list, tick this list. Obviously, she's done branding. Obviously, she's done comms and PR. And it was a marketing job. But at one point in the process, they asked me to send my outdoor resume to prove that I could hang with the employees and the staff and I'd be passionate about the course link. So I had to put this resume together about what rivers I'd rafted, what climbs I'd done, what backpacks I'd done. And that was all fairly new to me. I hadn't started doing any of that till first time I skied, I was 25. So my resume wasn't deep, but I tried a lot of things. And so they thought, well, this is somebody that's got the business acumen and would really enjoy hanging out with instructors and students. And I could talk the talk and walk the walk. So it was so funny. I'd never imagined part of what got me a job was the fact that I had done all these crazy things on the weekends.
That is awesome. That outdoor resume. I hadn't thought about having an outdoor resume, but in a way, it's a friend of mine from Strategic Connections just wrote a book called "What's Your And." I don't know if you know John Garrett,
Yes.
and his whole mindset or his whole theme and mantra is employees and need to share what they do outside of work because their and is what makes them an interesting person, which is then what connects them to other interesting people, right? And they
It's
retention's
true.
higher, energy's higher, engagement higher, and all that.
It's funny. I love when people put that on their resume, additional information or other, and they just give a little bit of their personality and their passion. I love it. Love, love, love it. Can never go wrong doing that.
But I can totally see why that company needed your outdoor because what they didn't want was someone who was indoor all the time now trying to market
Yeah.
outdoor adventures and experiences and all that if you've never done it. So you did have the trifecta there probably, right? You had the
Yeah.
marketing, you had the business, you had the leadership. Well, I guess that's more than try. And then you had the outdoor.
Yeah, close enough to try.
Sure,
Yeah, it
close
was
enough.
great. I really liked it, and it's a nonprofit, and I stayed in the outdoor industry for about 6 or 7 years with Outward Bound, and then with another outdoor company, and really loved it. Um, really loved it. And then I kind of came to a juncture in my career. I got sick, which, everybody's got a story to tell. And I got really sick and had to take, almost 2 years off. And, like we all do, like, I'm fine, I can keep working. And then you realize you can't keep working. And, so it was kind of like that slow drag where you finally realize, and I'm out. And so I
Ah,
took a couple years off, and as I started feeling better and feeling like I could go back to work, um, I didn't know I was concerned about energy. I always feel like I bring top energy to everything, and I just didn't have the energy. So I took an interim executive role, figuring, well, I told them, keep looking for your permanent leader. I'll come in and start it. Figuring that way, if my energy didn't last, there was an end in sight. This wasn't,
Yeah.
and it worked out well. And by the end of the 6 months I was there, I did my little own homemade website and said, I'm an interim executive, and just started figuring that would be a really good thing for someone who's recovering. And so you can work in bursts, but you really don't want to commit to a all-encompassing role. And so I did that for 10 years and got to run a whole bunch of really interesting projects and companies and initiatives. So it was fantastic.
Wow. And so, and it sounds like that works for your health then. You're
It
able to
did.
manage your energy, and then do you then do you rest then in between your assignments? In the time I've known you, you've never had a break that I know of, but
Well, it was about, oh, it was maybe 12 years ago when I was so sick. And so as my energy came back, I took on more projects, and I'd take on projects two at a time or sometimes three at a time. And so I really let my energy gauge how aggressive I was in my business. But it was a really good thing to do project work or interim work when when you really need to put something else as your priority, which is your health. That was a hard trade-off. And if I look back, you can kind of see my resume, and it's not linear. It wasn't up and to the right the whole way. There was 5, 7 years where I just really had to prioritize something else. And as my energy came back, then I was able to ramp back up at work. And it actually worked really well for me. It gave me a chance to see a whole bunch of different things, and again, go back to that connecting. One of the fun ones I got to run was Food Bank of the Rockies, and I learned so many things there. And then I did a project for Facebook, and I learned different stuff from what Facebook. And so I did all these different things, and it just kept trying to bring the dots back and connect them on what are the common themes, as opposed to subject matter expertise in something.
so yeah, subject matter expert, or just what's the next natural thing, above this, right? That, up that corporate ladder. I love all the dots that keep popping up for me, because I'm kind of a dot connector too. Is you made the comment, as being that middle child, you found your thing was passion and, making the world a better place. And then it was about learning and growing, and everything that you talk about fits into all of that.
Yeah,
And so, wow,
and
wow.
for that time, I wasn't really trying to go up because I just was trying to, balance everything. And so some projects I took were very small, and some projects I took were quite large, but everyone I learned something from. And it's kind of where you just take a break from your career progression, and you realize at the end of it that there's no such thing as a break if you're learning and curious and working with interesting people and doing work that gives you passion. It doesn't matter where you are in the org chart or what you're being paid, if you can make that happen. As long as you're learning and engaged, it was a really good period of time for me, very reflective. Um, and I'm really, you hate to say it, but in the long run it was really a good thing.
Yeah, because it caused you to slow down and pause. And number one, if you don't have your health, you're no good to anybody, yourself or anybody, right? You
But
can't function.
it could have been the same thing whether you're out having kids or out caregiving your mom or whatever. Those moments in life are so important, and even if they don't look right in a resume, they're part of who you are and what you bring to the world. And I think it's really important to look at them as opportunities to, expand as a human being.
Yeah.
And I like, in retrospect, it's easier to say that than it was at the time.
Yeah.
It was always,
I want to ask you about your psyche when you were going through that. Because I can imagine 2 years, and that you're really pausing. I mean, how did you? I mean, you need to for your health, but how did your ego deal with that? And that you were out of the workplace, and were you relevant? I mean, we're all of those are some of the things I know I went through when I was in transition. And each time you talk to someone like, oh well, you're not getting any younger, and blah blah blah, and you're just
I
like,
think I did it horrible. If I wanted to do over in anything, I do that over. And you just nobody wants to be around the person that doesn't feel good or the person, and you
Mhm.
didn't want to be that downer. So I kind of play act that I was working and I'm doing this and I'm doing this and I'm joining things and I'm doing podcasts and it was all or listening to like webinars and stuff. It was all interesting, but I really should have just sat on the couch, honestly.
Mhm.
But your ego doesn't let you do that, and it's a real regret of mine that somebody didn't come and just shake me and say, "Stop, do nothing, just be, and you'll pick career up later." So I think I was a little bit in denial and a little bit um, kind of being humored by people like, "Oh yeah, I'm sure you did a lot today." I'm like, "No, I did nothing today." But you feel that need to be productive and you know contributing, and sometimes you just need to sit and be and not do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. I've shifting from being in corporate and then starting my own business as an entrepreneur has been really tough shift for me in terms of when you're in corporate, a lot of times your schedule and your calendar, and when you're a leader, it's not your own, right? You're in demand. There's all these things that you're working on. When you become an entrepreneur, you're wearing all the hats. There's not a shortage of things to do, but what you want to be doing and how you want to be moving things forward. And then are you as successful as you want to be? I mean, those are all the things that start going through your head, when people, oh, how's business? And you're like, oh, how do
I got a call today. Yeah, it's
yeah.
really hard. Being an entrepreneur is so much harder than most people think. It's it takes a lot of tenacity and resilience and just chutzpah to get out there and keep showing up. I don't have anything to do today. How am I going to advance my business?
Yeah, and I'm enjoying meeting with you, but do you know any leads? You're just
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I kind
so.
of realized that running my own company, doing interim work was probably not, my calling, but I love the projects I did, and it gave me that chance to heal.
Well, and you probably have the ups and downs in between your interim assignments too. I mean, because I did some consulting after, the corporate roles, and it was like, oh, this is great. I love it. And when I had assignments, it was great. But when I didn't, it was, oh, well, when am I going to get the next one? I wish I had. Well, I wish I was like Nancy Sullivan. I don't know if you listened to her podcast.
I
She talked
did.
about that she doesn't have the worry gene, that it's all going to work out. And so I wish I had that in between, my stint in corporate and consulting and where I am now. And, that's not me, but, she's always, oh, it'll work out. It'll all work out. And I'm like,
I think
I,
that goes back to your question about risk taking. I wasn't a risk taker early in my life. Now I'm much more, so I could do that and say, so what? I don't have a project, and I'm gonna bike, or I'm gonna whatever I'm gonna do, something else to interest myself. I'm gonna volunteer more. But that's a hard thing to do, particularly if you aren't comfortable with risk. Um, I don't think I'm an entrepreneur. I don't know that I would do that again. I'm comfortable with risk, but I want to be contributing and doing something, and that time in between was harder for me than I thought it would be.
yeah, yeah. Totally get it. And that's a lot of my business is project work. So it's kind of, oh, I have a great project and I'm working so hard. I'm so excited. And then in between projects, which I got to tell you is what I've loved about doing this podcast is that it's steady. It's giving me a real steady energy level and work level of telling stories, doing what I love, and interacting and connecting with people in between, right? Doing the big
Right.
projects, the creative projects, and the storytelling in a bigger way. So I shouldn't say in a bigger way, in a documented way, more in a project way. So,
Yeah.
because this is a pretty big way of telling stories.
It is a big wave.
So, Michelle, tell us about then how you got into the state. Because so you're running Food Bank of the Rockies. Did
Mhm.
that finish up and then you got tapped, or what?
No, I was nearing the end and they were interviewing my replacement and, just about to make an offer. And I saw, how you do when you're on the internet, this website that Polis we had just been elected and he was looking for people to help him. And I thought, I do transitions for a living. I come in as an interim and I help the last person exit with grace and I help the next person come into a fanfare. And, my whole job was change management and transition. So I thought I might be good at that. So I offered, you can go in and volunteer to be part of a transition committee or something. And it also said, "Would you be open to a position?" I'm like, "Heck yeah," because I was finishing up my project. And well,
And you're
time
500
passed.
cookie.
I would have volunteered. Uh, and then I got a call and an opportunity to meet with the governor. This was before he was um, inaugurated. And, you know, a week later, I had an offer to run human services. And then I started seeing the enormity of what I committed to do. So I finished at Food Bank in the Rockies on a Friday, and I started in my new job on a Monday. And
Wow.
I,
So
you
no
know,
break there. No
and it hasn't been a break
really
since, but that's okay. When you feel like when you're in the zone,
mhm.
you don't need that break as much as you do when you're not quite in your zone, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. And I've done several interviews, people who are in toxic environments, and that has caused health issues. Others have created kind of their own health issues by their nature, that they kind of work themselves to the brink and they realize they need to
Right.
pull back and that there's a pattern there. But they needed more data points and more times
Right.
unfortunately, for it to happen for them to go, oh, I'm causing this myself.
I'm
So,
creating my own challenge.
yeah.
No, it was actually great, and I'm glad I started then. And I'm glad I had 9 months under the belt before we had a pandemic and before we had all this, you know, rate this renewed awareness of racial tensions and social injustice. I mean, they've always been there. I just think a lot of us didn't see it on the front page of the paper, so it's easier to pretend it's not happening. And now it's, it's right there. And, the economy going down and, just the fear that's permeated a lot of people and, then the politics and everything else. But it seemed like, I'm glad it wasn't my first day when all this happened, and I had 9 months to put my team together and do all that before we got into, where we are right now. But um, like I said, I feel like everything I've done in my life has kind of positioned me to be able to do this role. I'm a delegator. I'm a leader of leaders. I have a broad view of the world. I'm pretty balanced in my values. I know where my red lines and my yellow lines are. Um, yeah, it's been a nice time to be of service.
Would you say you're in your dream job, or maybe you're just in your sweet spot, or how would you
I
describe it?
think, yeah, that's a good question. I think more my sweet spot than my dream job.
Yeah.
Um, and
Because like all your
I've had
experience is aligned, like you said. I mean, it's very lined up for this particular time.
it is. I think I've had a lot of dream jobs. Where it was the right job for me at that time and where my brain was and where my life was, and you got into it and you're like, I am loving this job. And then after a while, I'm super curious. Like once I feel like I've kind of done my crescendo of how much value I can add, then I'm ready to hand it off to someone else and go on to the next thing. And so I've been lucky enough to have a lot of jobs that put me in that sweet spot. And this one definitely does.
Yeah, yeah. Well, are you ready to hand this one off?
No, not in the
No,
middle of a pandemic.
no. I was just say this
Nope.
doesn't seem like probably well actually these types of roles, right? The handoff usually comes when the next governor comes in, right? In terms
Right.
of because
That's
there's
right.
usually a cabinet change then, and
Yep.
then your role is typically then replaced, right, with whoever if it is in office at that time. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an interim one. Like any appointee, you serve at the pleasure of the governor in my case. And um, and you have to be all in. You have to be willing to make the sacrifices and the changes to be there and to really I think people who do best in it are people that really feel called to public service. It's not a resume builder, it's a chance to give back. And I think my colleagues who are loving it and myself, we just feel like what a great chance to be able to do something positive for our state. What an honor to be given this opportunity.
yeah. Well, I remember the first, I think we were at a dine around one evening and you had just been tapped and we were all excited to find out how it all worked out and the role. And I remember that was what I walked away with was your whole description about, well, when you get tapped to serve, it's my time to serve and I'm honored to serve. And I was just like, wow, I hadn't really looked at it that way before. I looked at
Mhm.
it as, yeah, this is an interesting role, an interesting opportunity, but no, it was, so you definitely made an impression on me.
Oh,
So,
good. that's how I really feel about it. If anybody has a chance to do public service, whether it's in your city council or whatever realm you thrive in, you say yes. That's what you do, and you really focus on making the best impact you can for others, and then you go back to your life already in progress. Um, but I feel like it's an honor, and I think a lot of people have done amazing things when you read about people who've done amazing things in government and service and the nonprofit and the military and on and on and on. They really came at it with a view of public service. And this is my chance to give back. And I feel that way every day.
Wow. So that's a theme that you can see and touch and that resonates. It's who you're being, right? That's how you show
Yeah.
up. Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, gosh, I could probably keep chatting all afternoon, but we do have to wrap up the podcast here. I know it's already that time. It went by very quickly. Tell us what you think has kind of served you best throughout your career, whether it's a personality trait or a strength or a habit.
I'd say definitely it's something I inherited. I didn't develop is curiosity. Like every time I meet someone, I'm so curious to know more and hear their story. That's why I like your podcast, Kathy. And I'm curious when I read a book about something, all of a sudden I'm like, I got to read 6 more books on this because I'm fascinated. Or you watch a movie and you want to talk to people about it. And I've always just had that curiosity. Um, and I'm curious about so many things that curiosity has really helped me take roles that maybe didn't seem like an obvious one, or be interested in working for somebody who would add a perspective to me that I maybe didn't have. Who I was working for and the passion of the team always was a huge motivator for me versus the
Mhm.
title and the salary and the office. So I think curiosity was a big one. And also that willingness to trust your heart and pick a position where you like the people and you felt like you jived with them. And it's hard to say, but you're spending so many hours a day with people, and if you don't get energy from them, then that's not the right team to be on. I'd rather be on a good team in a job I don't love than a job I love with a team that I don't connect with. And so, meeting potential coworkers and finding out, do you guys have lunch together, or is it fair to bring your own sense of humor and your personal life into things, or is that not something we do? Yeah, that all matters to me. So
Yeah.
I really like to trust my heart and my instinct. Could I see myself with people? I've had a lot of jobs that had extensive travel, and and could I do a business trip to Singapore with this person or this team of people, and 2 weeks in, still be loving what I'm doing, or would I be making up a can't have dinner tonight? I don't got a sore throat or something. Like, does it make you a better person to be with them?
Yeah,
So
I love that. It's funny. I reached a point in my career. I remember talking with some colleagues and, like, well, what do you want to do next? And I kept thinking about the what and the doing. And what I kept coming back to was who did I want to be working with? And there
that's
was a
right.
part of me that's like, well, I want to be working with you. So wherever you're going, or what do let's look at that. Because
Exactly.
there is something about if you can travel with someone, if you can work with someone, it's you spend so much time in the workplace with these people. It has to be enjoyable and productive, and you're learning and growing and all those things. I mean, it
And
isn't.
you can bring your authentic self to it.
Mhm.
Yeah. You can be
Yeah,
genuine in your
you're at your
interactions.
best, they're at their best, and you kind of bring the best
Absolutely.
be out in each other. And yeah, that's an environment that I want to be part of. So,
Me too.
well, any other words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Maybe it's just on what we were talking about there. Is bringing your authentic self to work every day to everything you do. It used to be you had a work persona and a personal persona, and then your family knew you differently. And with social media and intersecting of all of our life, you have one persona now. And I really want to encourage people to bring their authentic self. And if you have a dry sense of humor, bring it to the office. If you have um, family's critically important to you, don't be afraid to mention what's going on in your family. All those things make teams work better together, make life more enjoyable, and you get better outcomes. So really encouraging people to, bring who they are there. I don't know if you remember, Kathy, back in the day when it was seen if you had a tattoo that was unprofessional.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Or restrictions on, you have to wear pantyhose and not colored ones, just regular ones, and pants, and you just didn't bring who you were to work all the time. And now people just are who they are, and you can wear big earrings, and you can have fun glasses, and you can talk about what you did over the weekend, and I love that. And so just really encouraging people to don't fall into the mold that you have to be what you think you need to be for that role. Be who you are, and if it's not the right fit for you, there's another great fit somewhere else for you.
Yeah. Well, say, the weekend stuff and your be a whole person, but also, you mentioned earlier about the resume that there was a 2 year, was there a gap in the resume and some people might have those gaps. Do you think it's more acceptable these days then to have that gap to say, hey, I took a year off and I traveled the world? I mean, I think that experience is just as valuable as I was in the office working on a project for a year. I mean, there's great life lessons in both
I
ways.
agree. I don't know if when you first did your resume, I'm sure you were doing like, I did this from November till March. Like you got to, nobody cares. Like nobody cares. And I always find I do a lot of interviewing. And when I see someone with a gap, I'm like, oh, I want to ask them, what'd you do with that? And people tell you amazing, I care gave my parents during that time,
Mhm.
or I was burned out. And some people say, just it didn't work for my family right then. And I think that's part of who you are and what you bring to the job. So I don't mind gaps, and I actually like when people are brave enough to put it in. But again, I don't work in, a maybe more structured environment where that might be frowned on. But most environments are coming where you bring your whole person, and
Seems like
you
most
can,
are starting to shift,
yeah,
right? You have to because the millennials aren't going to be part of that. And I think the rest of us need to follow their lead and go, you know what, we don't need to be part of that.
exactly.
We're all human beings and we have lives and, stuff happens and things flow and change. And so that's what I bring. Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
just humans.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, again, it's been an honor to hear your story and hear all that you've done. And again, I want to thank you for your public service and knowing again what you're doing. Yeah, listeners, about 2 weeks ago, Michelle was on a panel that talked about COVID in the state of Colorado, and it was so powerful to hear from someone that giving you an update. I mean, it was really powerful for me, and that you brought in some colleagues, and it was just really interesting. So but again, I realize I'm going on and on again, and I need to wrap
Okay,
up.
it's so nice to talk to you, Kathy.
So thank you so much. And listeners, if you've enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below and you'll be alerted as other interviews are published. If you have any questions, you can post them on my website, lifestorycurator.com, and I'll make sure to get them to Michelle if it's for Michelle or for me. And on that note, I guess we'll just wrap up. And I just want to wish everyone, please stay safe, stay well, and let's keep sharing these stories. Have a great day.